It solves many problems like managing containers for you, so you don't have to pull Docker images and then create containers. It also manages service discovery, which means you don't have to worry about connection strings as it's all handled by Aspire. It holds many things like a developer dashboard, components, service discovery, and it aids deployment. So one of the benefits of .NET Aspire is that it makes the orchestration of containers easier at the development time. It does this through a project with the .app host extension. So as we can see in this file, we have our services which we are registering. So on line 3, for example, we're creating a cache, which is an instance of Redis. This is creating a container that runs Redis, and it's also creating a reference to it stored in the variable cache. On line 5, we're creating Postgres, but we're also registering pgadmin. This means Aspire will start up a pgadmin container, which we can access through the Aspire dashboard. Line 8 creates a database, which we can then reference in our services later on. On line 12, for example, we're creating an API service, which is starting up one of our program CSs. It's gaining references to the Postgres database and the cache, but it's also waiting for them to become available so we don't have any errors. On line 21, we are registering our Blazor front end, which also has references to the cache, but also the API service, which we've defined on line 12. The benefit of this is that it allows us to ensure everything we need for our application is running. And there's no need to go and configure Docker containers, as Aspire will do it all for you.
When you're developing this, Johan, does that, if you go back a page,
yeah,
when you run this, because it's just a regular it's a regular .NET project, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you, in Visual Studio, do you run this project and it sets all those things up for you?
Yes. Yeah, it does everything for you. Yeah.
Okay. And is that a fresh database, or do you have to seed it with data, or could it?
Yes, you have to seed it at the moment, but I think there's also functionality for you to be able to mount volumes, so there is some persistence there.
Oh, cool. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So also Aspire allows you to set up service defaults for each service that's running. So this allows you to register things like health checks, telemetry, service discovery, and retry strategies. So this keeps the setup of common services centralized, which means you can configure or add extra common services with ease. This is an extension method which is run within whichever service you need it. Yeah. So a bit about the developer dashboard. In a developer dashboard, you have a lot of things which are useful for development, all centralized. So for example, you've got your metrics, which gives you readouts about like database requests, but also things that are running on ASP.NET Core. So for example, garbage collection times and how long it takes for JIT to happen. With the resource view, it gives you a view of all the things that your application are using. So for example, you've got your containers. So we've got our cache and our Postgres instance, but also the Postgres pgadmin instance, as well as our projects, so our API service and our front end.
And are these running? Sorry to cut across you.
That's all right.
And are these running in Docker on your local machine while you're developing? So these are just containers running locally, or are they?
Yes, they're running locally in Docker.
And is the main application, I think I can see that the answer is this, but the Blazor web front end is also running in Docker?
I'm not sure about that.
It looks like it down the bottom. It looks like you've got web front end running, and it appears to be a regular. Well, maybe not actually, because the source there says Aspire to Do's WebCS proj. Do you know, Dan?
It's the left-hand column there tells you what the kind of things they are.
Oh, okay.
I don't think that they are executing in Docker at this point, but they may be, but I'm not sure. But what you can see from that screenshot there is that Johan's taken that screenshot during startup. So you can see because Postgres and PostgresDB and whatever aren't ready, the API service is waiting.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. Oh, very cool.
And that's actually before Johan added something in on the web front end saying wait for the API service, because occasionally he was having it pop up and he said, oh, the API is not working. And I said, I think it's because it's not started yet. So subsequent to this screenshot, we modified the web front end to say wait for the API service. And then once API was running, then the browser pops up with the web front end in it.
Okay. So I'll let you continue, and I'll try and ask more of the questions at the end.
So yeah, in the resource view, you can see that it gives you a lot of important information, like the type that's running, the state, but it also, if you run into any exceptions, it will also tell you next to the state. So for example, if I have an error with the API service, it will say running with a like a big 1 next to it, saying that's where the error is, which is useful for working out why something's broken. And then also on the end-to-end traces, it gives you access to seeing the request as it's made, which is very useful. So Aspire comes with a lot of different integrations, which use the main technologies that are industry standard. So for example, we've got Redis, RabbitMQ, Postgres, etc. And it's important to note, to use an integration, you need to use 2 packages. One which is run on the Aspire project, which is an Aspire host project, but also on the service that is consuming it. But that will be, I think that's documented whenever you want to use something.
So the Aspire ones only run in the Aspire project, is that right? Or they're only referenced by the Aspire project?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's everything.
So, question then on maybe this question to Dan. So, does Aspire emit a Helm chart? How what's the out? If you choose to develop this way, how can we make that more seamless for us putting this stuff live?
So yeah,
really used for that?
I have thought about that, and I think we're kind of so far down the line that we'll continue to do things the way we are. But logically, what this allows you to do is, I think you can actually get this to create things like compose files and Kubernetes manifests for you. There we go, manually create or automatically create. Yeah, there we go. You can get it to generate them for you with Aspirate, which was a third-party tool, but I think Microsoft have taken it on. But the idea is that you can seamlessly go from working locally with Docker to to Kubernetes. And the reason for that is that Aspire is designed for producing service intercommunication, bringing the services up and then allowing communication between them. So in Kubernetes we've got services which have got a name, and they appear in DNS. And so a similar kind of thing is happening inside Aspire. And you saw it in the service defaults where it was doing add service discovery. And what that allows you to do is a consuming app can go, yeah, I want to use the Data Magic DB, please. And of course, Data Magic DB is not a thing, but Aspire is providing you with a connection string to get that. But what happens in Kubernetes is we actually end up talking directly to the service itself. Yeah. Okay. So it's a fairly sort of seamless-ish transition from one to the other. It's trying to make it easy to get what they're trying to do is give you a very smooth cloud to actually getting these into hosting them in Azure Kubernetes.
Yeah.
So a lot of this.
Which is what we're aiming for as well with our packaging as well, isn't it? So
imagine
why. Packaging.
Yes, yeah. So it will be interesting to see if it can help with generating Helm charts, and we could do with having a tool that generates Helm charts from deployments and things like from manifest files, because reasonably complicated. depending on how configurable you make them. But it just gives initial people who haven't used Kubernetes and things like that, gives them a much easier initial path than we all had. You know, when we first came into Docker and we were running our stuff not in Kubernetes, we were running things in Docker containers on VMs, you know, before we actually bit the bullet and went to Kubernetes.
So quick question, Johan, can we run this now? And because the bit that I'm really interested in us all learning from is the tracing. Is it possible to do that?
Yes.
Because obviously, Dan, we you know, for a while we've been talking about looking at Elasticsearch's APM capabilities and how that could help us. But one thing that strikes me is that we would all benefit from the sort of performance learnings as you develop by having traces available. So this, can you perhaps, Dan, if you can walk us through what's happening here and just sort of explain what this is showing us?
Well, I think Johan can actually.
Oh, Johan.
Okay, so we've sent a request to an API, which is this API service. Let me just bring up. So this is the main API
the reason, sorry, the mental background to this. The reason it's all Pokemon is I was finding a free API that had interesting information on it, and it's quite a good. It's quite a good free REST API, the Pokemon API.
Okay, cool.
So,
so if you start from the very top.
Yeah. So we send a GET from the web front end through just a REST client, which then sends that to the API service, which then sends off, it checks a cache, which is Redis, if it's got anything in it. It hasn't got anything in it, so it's going to ask the API to go get from a different controller, a different API. So these are all the requests.
Yeah, so to be clear, I asked him totally unnecessarily, but to aid understanding distributed tracing. The light yellow, as opposed to the brownish one, is actually a second API. So he's got his web front end, the API that's talking to, and then totally unnecessarily, another API service, another microservice that he's also hosting, which is the Pokemon API service. And so this is kind of like, if you think about the web front end being the Data Magic UI, the API service being the Data Magic's API, and then the Pokemon service being the Magic Suite API. So there's two APIs involved, and one might call out to the other. And that was just to show that you can see tracing going through completely different executables, and you still seeing information going on.
I can see that API service is making multiple calls by the looks of things. There's a sequential one at the start, and then there's a bunch in parallel.
Yes.
Going off to the pokeapi.co. And then it assembles the results, caches it at the end. Is that right?
Yeah. So it caches it to the this API, to the one that's directly accessible.
So I mean, this is a sort of a development unlock that we haven't really done as a company yet. Is traces. We looked at it in the past, and perhaps to our detriment, we never really sort of invested in, really using this to understand what's going on under the hood. It's so useful in performance management, and where can we? I mean, looking at this one, you can see that had we done all of those calls off to pokeapi.co in series, we would have caused the query to take much longer. So the fact they're going in parallel is a huge advantage. Also, presumably, if you made the same call again, you'd see the cache kick in.
Yeah. So if I just go.
Yeah, can you do that actually? Yeah.
There we go. So it's just one request, so it goes straight to the cache.
Yeah, brilliant. How cool is that? Sorry, Dan.
That's all right. If you go back to that previous trace, if you click on, go back to the traces, and so the nice thing is here as well, if you go back to traces, actually the traces view, the overview, you can see quite nicely here. You can see all the requests, you can see durations and how long they took. I mean, this is specific to Aspire, but you get similar views to these in Jaeger and Elastic APM and so on. And I am inches away from getting Elastic APM working. But the nice thing is there that you can see, oh yeah, okay, there's 3 different services, see 3 different spans involved there on that middle one. Oh, I'll go and have a look at that. That's 22 going on now. Yeah, so that's quite interesting. But if you click on that one, the long one, and we go into there, the nice thing is that you can actually see what's going on. So you can click on any one of these API calls off to the Poke service. So that one, yeah, if you do the other one, the one underneath it.
This one, yeah.
Yeah. So you can see that's a GET. It's a client. You can see the server it's going off to, and you can see the full URL that was used as well. So that can help you troubleshooting. What am I actually going off to try and go and get? And you can see that's going to go and get all the Pokemon. And then if you click on like the next line down on the left, you can see this is actually going off to go and get Pokemon number 1. So you can see what the individual calls are, which is really useful.
And there's a view logs there. What happens if you click on that?
Yeah, click view logs. Yeah. So this is all the logs associated with that particular call.
Yeah.
Or with that trace ID. And so it's quite nice. If you get an exception, you can, if you go back to the resources view, we haven't got any exceptions here, but as Johan was saying at the beginning, you get like a 1 with a circle around it, right? And if you click on it, it then takes you to the structured view. If you click on structured on the left, and it filters it to the errors. So you would just see the 3 error messages, which we don't. Oh, we do have one. There we go. And then you can click on that and see what's going on, basically, and you can see whether if that's part of a trace, what it's part of, and so on. So yeah, it's you get a lot of information. It's very nice.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And if you just go into the app quickly, into the actual application and go to the to-dos bit.
Oh wait, yep. Where was it? There we go.
And just create a quick entry, and there you go. And if we go back and have a look at the traces, you can see on the traces down there, there we go. You can see the database activity, and then you can click on one of those database lines and you can actually see what the SQL that was executed. So if something's taking a long time, you can see which one it is and why.
Okay, so I think what we're going to do, this is such a useful video, we'll put it up on the community for the world to see. With that in mind, Dan, how do you think we can use this? Is this something that for our own product, because we've got at the minute we've got our solution filters and our multiple startup projects and all the rest of it, is this something that we could, with a little bit of thought, use to gain the benefits of the tracing?
Aspire's quite cool because you can actually fire up the Aspire dashboard itself without fully opting into Aspire. Just from the perspective of it receiving structured logging, traces, and metrics.
Yes.
I think the Magic Suite API already has, I think it's possibly commented out at the moment, but it already has the code in it for sending out open telemetry.
Yeah.
So what we should be able to do, and we were kind of messing about this with local instances of Jaeger, but I think this is might be a more common UI which we would use. For dev work, is to be able to have it so that we can fire this up, and then when Rolly's doing some local Magic Suite dev, he can then see the structured logging and traces and everything going into his local Aspire instance. So I'll see if I can get that story working, because that's the simplest step. The ops dashboard itself does have an Aspire set up for it, really, because when I initially created it, it went, do you want to enlist this in Aspire? And I went, yeah, all right. So we have got it for that, but logically, it might be something that we fire up for other things. But because we've got so many projects and kind of so many different dependencies and so on, we don't currently really have a scenario where we are going to fire up the whole of Magic Suite on your local machine. It's
No.
usually that you're running one or two apps, and in fact, you might even run a local app against a remote API, because you're working with Data Magic, and actually you're going to work with the Alpha 2 API.
But per
But you could
solution
still
filter,
have stuff
you
going
know,
locally.
because we've got solution filters set up for Data Magic, for Report Magic, you know,
Mhm.
where we're running 2 or 3 different projects at once. If we added this in, I think that would be really useful for the dev process. But if we
Yeah,
did it on
I'm
the
not
simplest
sure
possible one
exactly how we'd do
first.
that.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I'm not sure how we'd do it, in as much as we'd have to have, if you're talking about having one of these per solution filter to
Yep.
match developing, I don't know, Alert Magic UI, we could potentially do that, but it might be a simplest step as part of that is to just say that all things would include an Aspire dashboard, and then we would just make sure that all the apps are configured to allow sending out open telemetry, and then when you're deving locally, it would try and send open telemetry locally.
And I think that's the key thing. Yeah,
give you most of what you need.
It's the traces I think we're missing at the minute. I think we hugely benefit from that. So yeah. Okay, cool. Well, look, Johan, thank you so much for that presentation. We'll put this video up online. And yeah, Dan, perhaps on one of the R&D Fridays, let's have a look and see if we can get it set up for maybe, as you say, the Alert Magic UI or the Data Magic UI or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And that will prove to ourselves that the open telemetry stuff is going there. And if you remember, I did a whole bunch of stuff with sources and things. And you can specify, oh, I'm starting a new span here because I'm going to start a bit of work. So there is stuff, for example, in the worker where it's starting up things, spans and things, and it's going, yeah, I'm just starting this job now. So all the stuff that follows is part of me executing this job. And we were seeing those inside Jaeger, and that was really cool. I can't remember why we stopped. I think the overhead was too high, and possibly because we were sending too much information. And it might be that actually we don't enable all the open telemetry for production, but maybe we do for PS or staging or something like that.
Yeah.
Which would allow us to look at real world examples of reports and see what the issues are there.
Well,
but ultimately, I want to get it
if...
into APM, which I've nearly got working, as I say.
Yeah, I also wonder that during test, when Claire finds a problem, we can just ask her to send us the trace, reference the trace, absolutely. And she can just go, yeah, here it is. So, yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, look, again, thanks to Johan for preparing that. We'll pop this up online and put it in the community. Right, I've stopped the recording.